Greetings. My name is Peg Hosky from FedInsider, and on behalf of ViON and FedInsider and NetApp, I'm pleased to welcome you to our educational webinar on the pathway to IT modernization in government. Before we begin, we have a few polling questions that we'd like you to answer so our speakers can fine-tune their remarks. So if you'd please indicate your choices on these questions, we can get started. Be sure to type in any questions in the Q&A pod on the left of your screen, and we'll try to answer your questions during the webinar. Also, take note of the resources button on the left side of your screen. You'll be able to download today's slides and other informative materials. We have expert speakers in store for you today from the Department of Homeland Security, ViON, and NetApp, and we'll introduce each of them as we move ahead in the discussion. With that, I'd like to just welcome our first speaker, Mark Kneidinger. Mark is Director of Federal Network Resilience at the National Protection and Programs Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security. Mark is one of the 7 members of the Office of Management and Budget's New Technology Modernization Fund Board, chaired by the Federal CIO, Suzette Kent. Mark, before we start talking about modernization, why don't you just fill us in a little bit more on your background?
Sure, Peg. Happy to do that. Basically, the organization that I manage is the interface to all federal executive branch agencies, so basically 103 agencies, which includes the 23 CFO Act agencies as well as the non-CFO Act agencies. So our work is really to bring to those agencies awareness of cybersecurity capacities that DHS has. That's the focus of my organization in relationship to the work that we're conducting with the agencies. From a background perspective, I've been with DHS for the last 5 years or so. Prior to that, I was actually out in industry, retired from industry, and prior to that, being a White House appointee, I've been a federal CIO, I've been a state government CIO, so a broad range of different experiences that has really, I think, culminated in a lot of the work that we're engaged with within DHS, and especially working with the CIOs and CISOs across the government to see where we can not only be able to serve and provide them capacity to address their cybersecurity requirements, but also having a familiarity as to the challenges that they're facing. Because one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is not only in regards to the activity, as you've indicated, regards to the Technology Modernization Fund, but also taking a look at the significant drivers that agencies are dealing with at this point from IT modernization activity, but also have an opportunity to talk about the agency environment and some of the challenges that they're having. So given that as sort of a backdrop, that's really going to be the focus of the discussion that I'm ready to present to you.
Well, excellent. And I know, Executive Order 13800, IT modernization, cyber risk, these are just a few of the factors that are driving change. But I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. What do you see in the works for modernization? What's driving it?
Sure, Peg. And so basically, let's take a look at 3 primary areas that are really driving the IT modernization activity. Many of the participants on this webinar, I'm sure, are very familiar with Executive Order 13800. That was the executive order that had initiated the IT modernization activity, specifically focused in regards to cybersecurity. So that's one of the elements, and I'm going to get into more detail as to that one specifically. There's also IT modernization activity itself that is outside the IT modernization plan that had been derived from the executive order, and that is to develop a number of centers of excellence. So we'll talk about that. And in addition to that, another driver specifically in regards to the cybersecurity area in support of the agencies are what's called BODs, or Binding Operational Directives. So let me go to the EO 13800 first. That executive order actually had 4 work streams that had been defined. The first work stream being the federal government, another work stream dealing with workforce and what the government needs to do in regards to addressing some of the workforce challenges. Another work stream dealing with international affairs and basically how the U.S. engages with foreign countries in regards to cybersecurity and such. And the last, or the fourth work stream was dealing with the private sector. As you're aware, DHS deals with all that. We're engaged not only with the federal agencies, but state agencies, private sector, foreign governments, and the like. So the first work stream being the IT modernization activity under that executive order derived 2 primary products. The first one is IT modernization plan, and the second was a cyber risk determination plan. So the IT modernization plan itself actually has 53 tasks associated with it, where OMB, DHS, and GSA have the bulk of responsibilities. And basically each task has a responsibility owner, a specific agency, as well as agencies that would work to be able to meet specific deliverables. So of those 53 tasks, there were primarily 3 focus areas. And those tasks basically going into more specific activities within each of those categories. So those 3 categories included safeguarding HVAs, or high-value assets, promoting modernization of network infrastructure, leveraging shared services. So from the safeguarding HVAs, or high-value asset, there was a lot of activity indicated in the IT modernization plan, promoting agencies to be able to take a look at their high-value assets and assess how well they're secured. But beyond that, also, what are some of the primary security parameters and controls that are really necessary for high-value assets? Now, DHS has a responsibility to work with agencies, especially at what's called a top-tier level of high-value assets, which are the most critical information systems in the government, and to assess that. And we do that through a combined set of assessments. But there's thousands of high-value assets. So DHS cannot assess all of those, but the IT modernization plan is basically set up to derive direction, guidance, and future policies as to agencies being able to assess and put in appropriate guidance in regards to their individual high-value assets. The second primary category was promoting modernization of network infrastructure. Excuse me. And with that, a couple elements there that are focused as part of the IT modernization plan. One of them is the EIS contract that's come out of GSA. All agencies are working towards the transition to EIS in regards to network providers and support. And one of the elements that was highlighted in the IT modernization plan is how we can be able to support the smaller non-CFO Act agencies and be able to provide them more specific guidance in regards to the type of tasks or services that they should be looking for through the EIS contract, basically making it easier for them to understand, given the variety of different services that could be provided to the agency, what are some of the specific ones that they should focus on in relationship to the size of their agency and specifically in meeting their network needs and requirements. Another element in regards to the IT modernization plan along that line is also encouraging the consolidation of networks. Many departments, large departments as well as even the smaller ones, have numerous federated networks. In having a federated network or networks in essence that also do not have segregation, you are really opening yourself up to an increased potential of an incident occurring. So the IT modernization plan certainly was focusing in that area as well. The third area, leveraging shared services, and this is looking at a promotion of migrating legacy systems to the cloud. But as part of that, what are the considerations that should be taken for that to occur, including language for contracts, including taking a look at the specific architecture as to, does it really make sense for migration to the cloud? What are some of the cybersecurity elements that need to be considered? So there's a strong promotion in moving legacy systems to the cloud arena, really promoting, going back to some of the original activities or policies coming out of OMB, such as cloud first. In this case, really looking at cloud safe. How can we do this effectively and securely in that migration? But also underlying the perspective that agencies still own the responsibility of risk. So as such, in moving an application to the cloud, the agency does not negate the responsibility for the risk and for the security of that application. So understanding what type of information you need to have available to you from the cloud provider is another key element. So that type of guidance and future policies were part of the IT modernization plan. Now, in addition to that, when we talk about shared services, there were other elements that were part of that, which, as we take a look at migration to a cloud arena, we also need to take a look at our current capacities, and specifically from DHS, as to how we're securing the current infrastructure, and then how that needs to morph in relationship to securing a cloud environment. So a couple key elements in the plan itself is looking at our Einstein program. And what does the Einstein program need to do in relationship to being able to offer consistent and similar type of services in securing that cloud environment? Another is CDM in regards to both cloud as well as mobility. The TIC activity and taking a look at the upcoming TIC reference architecture, and what are some of the different policies that need to occur in relationship to TIC, especially given the difference between the intent that TIC has been put in place and where we're going in regards to that cloud migration. So from the IT modernization plan, those are primary elements. The second document, as I indicated, as part of the development was the cyber risk determination plan. And this is where the purpose of this was to take a look across all 103 agencies and assess, and basically this was a self-assessment from the agencies as to where they are in relationship to risk levels associated with the NIST cyber risk framework. The results of that was culminated in regards to illustrating the different risk levels across the entire government, as well as it was incorporated within the recent FISMA annual congressional report. One other IT modernization activity that actually was outside the EO work itself, and that was the centers of excellence that have been basically put in place as a pilot. USDA is the department that, in essence, is very much involved with OSTP as well as GSA in regards to establishing these centers of excellence pilots. And specifically, there's pilots that are going to be put in place for cloud, IT infrastructure, optimization, customer exposure, service delivery analysis, looking at how we can put pilots in place that really will assist agencies in effective and successful models for cloud migration, IT optimization, as well as how we're interfacing with our constituent base. The last part of the IT modernization effort that I wanted to talk about are the BODs, or Binding Operational Directives. These directives are directives coming out of the authority of DHS, and these are directives that are made to address specific issues or mitigation perspectives that need to occur across the entire government. The BODs are a key element to IT modernization because basically, as we're taking a look at the various federated infrastructures that are out there, and obviously to be able to support the IT modernization intent, we need to take a look at what of the cybersecurity perspectives need to be emphasized throughout the government so we have a consistent approach, or in essence, a consistent understanding as to activities that need to take place. So BODs are another way in regards to supporting the IT modernization efforts. And part of that is also supporting the agency as they're looking at consolidation of the networks or looking at their infrastructure in general in regards to the level of capabilities that they have on the infrastructure to identify where there may be areas of mitigation. One of the more recent BODs is dealing with basically the capacity in regards to website presence and how we're protecting that in regards to DMARC and such. So BODs, the IT Modernization Centers of Excellence, and also the EO activity under the IT Modernization Plan are primary drivers that are pushing change within the agency's environment. So I'll stop there.
Well, let's talk about the Technology Modernization Fund, Mark, because you are central to the process, and I know there's been questions since it is so new. Can you give us some highlights?
Yeah, absolutely. The Technology Modernization Fund was established with Congress providing an initial $100 million investment. And basically, it's a new funding model. It basically provides funding to agencies based on the proposals that they do provide that needs to be repaid over a 5-year period, and primarily being repaid and looked at in regards to savings that are as a result of that specific activity that the proposal had represented. So agencies can submit proposals to the TMF board, and basically there's a GSA PMO in play that the proposals would go to, and with initial reviews. The Technology Modernization Fund Board will review those proposals, taking a look at those proposals with the greatest impact, the strongest business case, and the highest probability of success. Based on that review and meeting those criteria, the proposals or the agency representatives, if selected, then would be brought in front of the TMF board to provide a second level, more detailed description of the proposal itself. Given the success of that and funding being provided, as part of that is also presenting the plan for repayment. So this is a fund that is self-generating. So as the money is provided in support and award to the proposals, the agency is obligated to pay these funds back. Now, to assist the agency once a proposal is awarded and funding is provided, there will be technical expertise that will be provided and available on hand to support the agencies, leveraging resources from GSA as well as USDS to improve the team's capability and troubleshoot any impediments to the success of that specific proposal. The agency does repay to the TMF, and through that we'll be then driving both commitment from the agency, because basically the CIO and CFO need to come to agreement given the repayment process, but it also will provide a self-sustaining continued reinvestment resource for future projects.
One of our participants asked, does the TMF only cover part of the cost, with the bulk coming from the individual agencies through their IT working capital funds? Can you remark on that, Mark?
I can, and it really is dependent upon what the agencies are looking for. The proposal could be for a full amount. It could be for a partial amount. It could be for an amount to begin the specific activity, to kickstart it, or there's funding that has already been made available, but there's a deficit of X dollars. So it really is up to the agency as to what they're requesting.
Excellent. I think let's move on and talk about some of the challenges right now in the environment that are really causing agencies to scramble a bit.
Yeah, well, if you think about the changes that have occurred within agencies, as well as the expectations that have been set for agencies, specifically in the cyber area, and going back to the previous administration, Tony Scott, when Tony Scott was federal CIO, there was he came in right at the time of the OPM breach. That had some significant drivers as to quick change in regards to activities that agencies needed to address from a cybersecurity perspective. The first part of that set of activities was called a sprint. So there was a number of specific actions that the agencies were required to do within a very short period of time. Now, to accommodate that, agencies had to readjust priorities to be able to address that. That then led to the Cybersecurity National Action Plan, or CNAP, which had additional activities that, looking at the trending and the broad set of challenges that were being faced by agencies, especially in the cybersecurity area, there were a set of different tasks that were laid out that included policies as well as other type of directives that agencies needed to comply with. At the end of the administration, what had occurred is that there was a cybersecurity document that was prepared for the next administration saying, here's what the CNAP tried to accomplish, here are the things that it did accomplish, but here's the outstanding activities. Much of that was actually leveraged as the IT modernization activity was being derived. So the IT modernization plan itself took many of those elements, plus a number of other elements that they wanted to be able to, again, emphasize and reinforce with agencies. So as we go down that track, and also included as we put bots in place, agencies respond to those, they become the priorities, but priorities on top of already a number of priorities that agencies have. At a time where there is a number of turnovers with CIOs, a number of vacant positions for political CIOs, turnovers with CISOs, budget challenges that we've all faced, workforce challenges. So as agencies are in this situation in regards to change of leadership or short-term leadership, as well as people that just need to get up to speed as to the environment of the agency, when you have that environment and then you have these additional drivers coming down from IT modernization and other drivers of that type, the agency certainly is set up in a situation where it's trying to balance all the various priorities that are in front of them. One of the things that we try to do, at least within my division, as the interface to the 103 agencies out there, is given those challenges, where can we help them from a training perspective, from understanding from a governance perspective, or in a number of cases, how can we help in regards to supporting their understanding of activities that they should be engaged, such as if there's a need to do network segmentation. Well, how do you do that? What's the architectural elements that need to be done? So we keep a very close eye in regards to the challenges that the agencies are facing as these drivers are coming down, so we can see where we can better support, as well as be able to provide future services to them. But in general, it certainly is a challenging time for agencies because of the funding, the staffing, the leadership changes. but also at the same time with all these new drivers coming down.
Well, that's quite a lot going on, and I want to just, before we thank you for your portion of the presentation, just pick up on two questions here. One was on the fund itself, and are these loans as opposed to grants?
They are loans, right? The money has to be paid back, correct?
Gotcha.
And it has to be paid back within a 5-year period. Yep. And as part of the proposal that is submitted by the agency, in the template itself, the agency actually defines how they would pay it back, and would it be a 5-year, 3-year period? And in essence, given what is being proposed, what are some of the cost savings? So in essence, are those cost savings being applied to the payback? So all that really has to be part of the proposal that does come in.
Excellent. And just one more question. I do know, Mark, that we have quite a few people from state and state governments that are listening. And a question was posed, are there state governments that are considered leaders in IT modernization? Have you come across anything on that?
Well, that's a good question. My division is focused on the federal government. We have another division that does focus on state government as well as private sector. That's our secret division. So I really can't address that directly because I don't work that close with the state governments. The role that I do play, or that my division does play with the states, and this is something that we've talked about at the various NASIO conferences, is where we try to work with the state agencies that are interfacing with the federal agencies. And give you an example, like the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education interfaces with all the state education departments. So if there's initiatives that we're involved with that federal agency CIO can then push down to the state agency CIOs, we will support that type of activity. The only other state engagement that my area is involved with is like through the CDM program, and the ability for state governments to be able to take advantage of some of the cost savings for tools. But I'd be happy to provide a resource from our Seeker division that actually works on a regular basis with state governments.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll pass that along. Just one last question for you. Back to the fund. Is interest assessed on the loans?
That actually is to be determined yet.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that given the newness of the loan itself, and the newness, quite honestly, of kicking off the Technology Modernization Board, that is in discussion, but I don't have an answer to that. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we are ready to transition to the second half of our webinar, and in doing so, we're going to just have a polling question come up about whether or not agencies have submitted a formal request for MGT Act funding. So you'll see that pop up on your screen. And let me take this moment to thank Mark Kneidinger. That was excellent insight and truly appreciate it. So thanks so much for spending some time. If other questions are posted, we'll be sure to pass them along to you for response via email.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
At this point, I'd like to welcome our next two speakers who will have a ready dialogue to talk with us a little bit more about IT modernization. Rob Davies, Executive Vice President of Operations at ViON Corporation, and Mike Dye, Chief Technology Officer for Civilian Agencies for NetApp U.S. Public Sector. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Rob,
Hi,
can I ask?
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, excellent. I know you both have very diverse backgrounds. I'd like to just ask Rob first. I know ViON's been involved for about 37 years serving the market, but tell us about ViON and about yourself quickly.
Sure. Yep, ViON's been nearly 40 years now supporting the public sector with enterprise technology, or what we used to call enterprise technology, and of all variants. I'll say in the older days, the three-tiered architecture of storage, network, and compute, and now today, I think Pioneer was really a pioneer in delivering technology as a service in a granular consumption model to federal agencies, working with DISA initially back in the very early 2000s. And I have been in federal IT since for my entire career for more than 25 years, and I really cut my teeth in those older enterprise data centers, or how we used to refer to them, even though there are many still around.
Mike, return the compliment. Tell us a little bit about NetApp and yourself.
Well, NetApp just turned 25 about 3 months ago. People think of us as a data storage company, but now we prefer to think ourselves as a data management company, because we really focus on helping agencies and customers with the frictionless movement of data and the management of that data throughout their enterprise, and not solely focused on building infrastructure, but solving data management solutions. And I got Rob beat. I've been in this industry so long, I cut my teeth on mini computers. So,
well, welcome to the new world then, and
thank you.
Let's talk about how we can get some of the mini computers out of some of the agencies. And
I don't think there's any left, but that's okay.
What about the MGT Act? I know you guys have been looking at it closely for government. Can you give us a little summary? Rob, we'll start with you.
Sure, and I really appreciated Mark giving us a detailed discussion about the drivers and not only the Modernization and Government Act, but how it plays in the overall efforts that they're trying to drive, not just with the technology itself, but security. And it answered a lot of my questions, and I saw a lot of the questions popping up too that Mark was able to answer about how it functions and how it's going to be executed. I think that the fund itself is just meant to be one aspect that agencies can tap to modernize. But I think one of the other really, and I think it will become one of the other very effective components of that legislation, is that the working capital funds that the agencies can establish based on, as sweeps come through the year and they identify unspent money, that they can create their own working capital funds to then drive modernization efforts and to help subsidize modernization efforts, as we move through this period. So I think those are two really important features of the Act, and they are going to, I think agencies will find them to be very useful tools in how they start to actually execute against their plans for modernization.
I know that we want to talk today a little bit about some financial and technology strategies that agencies should consider. And I think that's something Rob and Mike will talk about in the slides ahead. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Well, looking at some of the challenges and solutions that you're seeing, can you give us some more detail on this, Mike? Why don't you start?
Well, it's an interesting dilemma in that we're not getting a lot of the things that we need to be able to drive new technology. We're seeing a lot of our customers that are coming to us and saying, how can we be more like industry and be dynamic and able to shift and change quickly, because we're not getting increased training and we're not getting some of the things that could help us move into this new technology. So we as industry have to recognize that we have to be flexible in enabling things like the MGT to succeed and give you not just more flexible purchasing and procurement options, but having technology that's dynamic and flexible enough to be able to fit into whatever model makes sense for your agency and the mission you're trying to solve. Big, chunky acquisitions are no longer going to be flexible enough to meet the needs of our agencies going forward, because the constituents are not operating that way, and we have to think about that and how we can respond effectively and quickly to these requirements. Mark hit on the shared services, and it's fantastic that we have the ability to flex up into a cloud, but we also have to remember that we've got some of this data that's still around, and it's about being able to adapt to these new technologies easily and readily.
What do you think, Rob?
No, and I think Mike's absolutely right, and I think the tools are there today for agencies to begin to modernize, and the tools are there for us to help our customers modernize. One of the things that I think, again, is going to be very useful, and this comes from some of the firsthand experience that I've had in the DoD with the working capital funds, is when agencies understand how those can be deployed and the different ways that they can procure technology to help them through this modernization path. So one of the we've not lived through yet, but certainly the Cloud First initiative, and that's introduced a lot of enthusiasm and energy around getting to cloud, getting to the public cloud, getting to cloud models. So effectively, your expertise as an agency and as an organization is not necessarily focused on comparing which vendor and what, but you're looking at what are the type of resources in compute and storage that I might need to manage the workloads that I have, and I'm going to leave it to the industry experts to help deliver that for me. Now, what I need to know as an agency is understand the cloud models, understand the procurement models, and have some transparency to the technology perhaps that's being deployed. But I'm consuming resources and services, and those services, I do not mean professional services. I mean the services of compute are being delivered to me, whether that's in a public cloud, it's in a private cloud, or I'm moving workload across both. So I think that those working capital funds will help agencies look at those models and then acquire those models, because they can be manipulated across fiscal years. They can help mitigate the risks of, planning a budget against what is essentially like a utility. And we say all the time, well, the government buys utilities without coming into danger of violating the anti-deficiency clause and going into ratifications and all those sorts of very difficult things. So why can't we do that in IT? We should be able to, because it really isn't any different. So that's where we can use those working capital funds to sort of smooth out the edges and help deliver those services under the existing FAR, because I don't think procurement change is necessary in the near term. There's always the requirement to keep the FAR current and to adapt it, but I think a wholesale push to change the FAR to try to access these new models is too lengthy a proposition when it can be done today. And I think one of the other underrated aspects of modernization is that you bring in these new cloud resources, whether that again is on-premise or off-prem cloud, a public cloud for your workloads, is what does that mean for the organization? We've got many IT shops that are still structured to support that three-tier architecture with a three-tier organization: storage administrators, network administrators, and then compute administrators with security wrapping around it. Well, now I need resource administrators to help me understand what resource I need to run which application and the security profiles that have to accompany that workload. So there is going to be that transition of the organization away from that legacy or that older structure to a new structure. And as Mike talked about it, the training that's going to have to be done to help drive that, and also sort of the cultural change to get comfortable that my job is not going to go away, because we still need to manage those resources in the public or private cloud, but we also need those resources, which are limited today, particularly in the federal space, in federal employees, to be more directed, I think, to the outcomes and effectiveness of the agency. And I think cloud models and consumption models really do help enable that shifting of resources, and then the cultural change will come with it.
Excellent, and thanks for answering a question from one of our participants. For those of you that are going to be getting credit for being on the webinar today, for your training credits, do answer polling questions as they are coming up. And we've got one coming up right now talking about data center modernization priorities. So we look for you to answer that question, and we'll continue on with our discussion following that. Next up, we're going to talk about the acceleration of the next generation data center and some of the things that are impacting that. And Mike, I wonder if you'd like to give us some insight there and then turn it over to Rob.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic how this industry has changed and adapted over the years to back in the good old days, so to speak, where you would have 4 drives in a big refrigerator-sized cabinet that also had the compute in it. Today we would call that a converged infrastructure. Well, a converged infrastructure today can be very beneficial to your agency because you can now buy something that you can get or get access to something that can be supported through a single phone call or that can be designed to fit a specific type of need. That need might be a very flexible need. You might need to put something in that can handle a cloud-like functionality in your data center, and it makes more sense for you to put it into your data center as opposed to getting one of the cloud providers to provide it for you. So it's that flexibility that Rob was talking about that we have to be able to provide, whether it's through a converged infrastructure, whether it's through shared services, through resources, or whether it's gaining access to a shared resource that's out in the public domain, so to speak, that we can then go out and utilize. And you know, we have specific business needs to hit on the slide that's up on the screen here. We have to be able to get to this next generation data center because we are seeing the model change dramatically. I find it interesting that as I do a lot of work in the civilian space, we have some agencies that can move with this new model a little bit more quickly than others because they're doing work that doesn't have dependencies on prior data. And they might be doing something scientific, or they might be dealing with data that they have to share with the public on a quicker turnaround, and they're not necessarily having to work with forms that were submitted in the 1950s. So being able to adapt to both of those models is going to be critical as we move forward because people are not going to want to write in and get paper documents back. They're going to want to be able to go to a government website and pull that information up immediately. So we have to find ways that we can expand and contract and work in this next generation data center so that we can scale up and scale down accordingly. It's not just being able to add more resources. Sometimes the workload changes and we need to be able to contract and assign those resources someplace else or just work with what we've got.
Rob, can you talk a little bit more about data center as a service and how does this match the requirements the agencies are looking for?
Sure. So I think Mike's conversation there really leads in nicely because I think he really identified, the underlying foundational elements of data center as a service, and simply that is delivering technology, modern technology, into the data center that is in a cloud consumption model that does go up and down, as Mike was talking about, and that helps address some of the organization and cultural change that we're going to see because this newer technology, these converged and hyper-converged infrastructures are software-driven. They're combining all the resources into a single management framework. So you no longer need the network, storage, compute, et cetera. You've got somebody that's running the workload in that platform. Some of the ways I think that it practically addresses the modernization initiative is, we've all been involved in data center moves and migrations and consolidations, and we talk about that, the target of always trying to, optimize the consumption of those resources. But the newer technology gives us that visibility instantaneously to see, are we consuming the compute resources, the storage resources efficiently? Do I have too many of them? Do I need to provision them out so I'm not paying for them? And if I am modernizing and I'm looking at these racks of servers that I have, what's the utilization therein? I've got them virtualized, so I'm running some type of hypervisor, but what does that look like? How much of those compute resources am I really using? And the converged infrastructures are specifically designed to optimize that use, and then we can consolidate floor space and get to, I won't say we'll get to that promised land of the very efficient space cooling power, but we really have to make progress on that front, make more progress on that front in the modernization space, because that's going to get us to a spot where I've got less infrastructure to manage. I'm managing it more like a cloud, and it gives me greater visibility into my workloads that I then can shift. I can take a look at what are the economics of running it here in this private cloud, which part of this workload can I put into the public cloud, right? And some, as Mike said, there are some agencies that have developed their interaction with the citizenry more recently, but that may not necessarily mean they can move those workloads to the cloud directly. They could, as he said, one of the key variables to identify in these workloads is, are you accessing some critical legacy data? And if you are, migrating into the cloud might impact how you deliver that service to your citizenry, how you fulfill your mission, or how you manage your business as an agency. So you have to be very careful about where you move those things and when you move them. So I do think the new technologies deployed in an as-a-service model will help agencies. One of the earlier questions was about funding and how much. It's a loan that I have to pay back essentially. Okay, I can request partial or full funding. One of the beauties of the as-a-service model is that in a traditional CapEx acquisition, I'm going to spend a lot more money to get the capacity that I need, and I may be pre-buying capacity that I expect to consume later in the year or in the following year. In that as-a-service model, I'm only paying for the capacity that I need at that moment. So if my initial compute capacity is small, I'm paying for that. If my initial storage capacity is small, it's 50 terabytes, that's a much more cost-effective proposition. And then I'm slowly growing through the year, or I'm spiking and coming back down if I have seasonality in my workloads. That can really efficiently utilize the capital. It can be managed to, I think, acquire some of those funds to generate the savings, to contribute to a working capital fund that'll further empower modernization. And I think you have to look at how these consumption models can help you drive that, that greater cycle of increasing your working capital funds and increasing your access to the modernization funds to help not only drive technology change in the agency, but that is also going to force the organizational and cultural change.
If I could add to that, Rob, I think it's important to create a workload that can do exactly what you're talking about, and that's have a definable set of requirements that is easily portable, so that you're not putting yourself into another siloed environment. And that gives you that ability to move and precisely dictate what kind of resources you're going to need, and not having you buy more than you need and not having leftover capacity that can't be utilized. If you can create utilizing the new tools and things like containers and the DevOps model, where you can be agile in your development and create these little definable entities of work that you're going to do, that makes it much easier to apply them where you have the resources and move them accordingly. And that falls right into what you can do in a data center as a service, because now I've got something that can be deployed because it's portable and it's compatible and is not tied into any given architecture.
Excellent. Our next question is, what are some key steps that you can take to accelerate modernization with data center as a service? And Rob, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and Mike just ended with, I think, a really critical point for this discussion, and that's the essentially executing against it. And the 5 points that we see before us on this slide, are all critical in that execution phase of your strategy. And I think that is very important as we look to the current 2020 deadline for modernization. There have been some articles and some discussions about that recently that I've been a part of, and I've said I don't think 2020 is realistic for an end point, but I do think it's realistic to demonstrate progress, and that having a plan for modernization and being able to identify the specific workloads that you can modernize easily and you can begin to get success with are those, I think, that need to be identified first, and you need to start to essentially use those as your own pilots, as your own proofs of concept for modernization. And I think because public cloud and private cloud are going to be part of this modernization future, it's testing these models, because it's going to help not test in the sense of grade, but sort of how do my technical teams interact with my procurement teams, interact with my management teams, to execute this plan and strategy if I haven't really done an as-a-service procurement before, or if I haven't bought a lot of public cloud. How do I get those three critical components of executing a plan in the federal government working together to do something new that we haven't necessarily done before? And I think the underlying technology that we're talking about in both the actual technology itself, the converged infrastructures, but also the procurement methods to do that, as a service, very granularly, paying only for what I need, being able to increase or decrease without penalty, without any balloon payments or anything that even resembles a lease. A true as a service delivery model. That's what's available today, and I think that's what agencies really need to aim for, because if you can have a private cloud in your data center and get the same benefits of the public cloud going up and down, then you should be able to do that, and we as industry should be able to deliver that to you. And I think lastly, one of the things that Mark talked about earlier were shared services, and I think leveraging that Mark's organization, when you as an agency want to try to do something like this, it's one thing to hear from industry and to try to point you to different agencies that have done it before. Maybe you want a little bit more objective perspective on it, but that's where I think one of the responsibilities in Mark's organization is to help those agencies and direct them to where this is being done and how you can do it, because as I said before, it's completely executable today under the FAR. We have customers that are doing it. Mike and I are working together in some of those spaces, delivering the actual technology we're talking about in the way we're talking about it. So I know it can be done. It's just something that I think needs to be more broadly entertained and experimented with throughout the agencies.
And Rob, we had a question from the audience about what would be a definition of holistic and achievable strategies?
I think a definition is being able to discern and define for your agency what constitutes modernization for me. If I'm an agency that has I've got mainframe applications, the classic case. I've got applications in distributed technology. I may not be a large agency, but I'm pretty significant. I think success is I've created a plan for modernizing. I know where my application dependencies are, in maybe not for every single application, but for the major systems I have. And I'm able to identify and select these workloads that I'm going to modernize first, look at that total cost of ownership for my new model against what I have, and be able to show those savings. I mean, those are exercises that we've all, as government and industry on this call, have probably participated in, either doing it ourselves internally or working with customers to do that as we're on large programs. The skill sets we need to do this are things we do day in and day out. We just have to apply them a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's having that plan is the holistic strategy, and then showing the success and knowing what success looks like has been being able to say, I'm going to do it with these 3 or 4 applications that are part of this system. I'm going to look at it for 2 months, see how it operates, and then I'm going to start to move the next set of applications. And I've got this strategy of moving through let's say I've got 25% of my workload or 30% of my workload. I think that with little effort, little modification, I can move into these new technologies. I can access some of the public cloud and some of the efficiencies and services that I get there, because it's an incredible value proposition. But then I've got these new models delivered on-prem or to a third-party data center that I can consume just the same way that I consume public cloud. And then I've got more resources and time to deal with those legacy applications where, I had some experience with the commercial side, and a lot of my commercial customers talk about the investment they have in some of those legacy technologies, and they treat it like just that. It's an investment. It's not a cost center. So they may be around for a while, but I can still apply that same as-a-service model to those technologies to help me get a cloud benefit there too.
Excellent. And Mike, I have a question for you about critical features or capabilities that MGT acquisition officers should incorporate into RFPs when developing requirements for IT systems. Can you address that for us?
Yeah, it kind of comes back to what Rob was just talking about. When you plan and prioritize your workloads, you want to make sure that you are going to use technologies that are portable and things that can reduce that friction. When we talk about holistic, it means that you have to take a look at your entire organization and develop a plan that prioritizes the workloads that should move, that might benefit from different technologies, and that might need to stay. But the key is to plan and prioritize and develop the holistic model, meaning looking at your entire infrastructure, not just some piece of it. Now, you might have some low-hanging fruit that you can go attack first, and that might make more sense to move to a public cloud, or might be more appropriate to move into a different type of resource. But when you look at some of the technologies that are out there, things like S3 that are portable, you can move things on and off-prem easily with that, and keep your applications running and keep them stable, but not lock yourself into any given technology. The most important thing is to be able to create that environment, because data, when you look at all of this, it's the heaviest part of your data center. It's the part where you have to actually move something that is meaningful to your users and to your community. So we have to look at what can make that effective and be stable and not lose any of that data.
And we're just about closing in on our last minute. Just wondering if we'd like to have some final comments, Rob, from you and from Mike, with some advice on data center modernization strategy.
Sure. I think again, the most fundamental thing is to have a plan and to begin to experiment with the different models that are out there, and find out what works for you and find out quickly. You don't want to fail over a year. You do need to be able to fail kind of quickly, and these models allow for that experimentation. But you need to look, I think, for the models that are going to give you the flexibility that can go up and can go down and don't have penalties associated with them. They don't have balloon payments. They behave like the public cloud, and it operates when I turn it off and I send it away. I'm not paying for it anymore, and that can help me get where I want to go, whether that's completely out of the data center business or it's to a more efficient data center where I've got my workload distributed across public cloud, some private cloud that I'm working, and then I can really dedicate some of those resources that I now have more of to that legacy environment, and some of those can be a longer-term prospect. But then I can truly tackle that situation in the way best for my agency.
I will echo what Rob said. The key word he said in my mind was flexibility. You have to plan and you have to be flexible so you can say, you know what, this legacy application actually works really well with what I have, and I want to keep that where it is. But I have these other applications that would be better suited to this type of architecture. But you don't know that until you've planned out that architecture and looked at what your agency needs are and how you can modernize that data center and choose the appropriate targets to move and choose the appropriate targets to stay, but develop a plan that is flexible and portable.
Well, thank you both very much, Rob and Mike. And of course, it was great to have Mark introduce the whole idea of IT modernization from the perspective of DHS. We've got some final polling questions you've probably just been answering. Just a reminder that a copy of the slides and some additional materials are in the resources button on the left side of your screen. If you requested a training certificate, you'll receive it via email shortly. Thank you so much for coming, and look forward to the next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.